Hello, my royal lovelies. Welcome back to the channel, and of course, welcome to my home. In today's video, I want to talk about what's been hitting the headlines recently. Of course, capitalising off the back of King Charles III's 75th birthday. Harry and Meghan's, the Montecito duo's biggest cheerleader. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to put on your rah-rah skirts. It's time to take out those pom-poms, and it's time to get cheering, because he was trying to capitalise off the back of King Charles's birthday by releasing an extract from the cheerleaders' upcoming book, Endgame. So what I want to do, first of all, is kind of read what was put. By the way, it was released via People magazine. Now, we all know that People magazine is another vehicle of a certain duo in Montecito. So it was written by Michelle Tauber. So it wasn't written by the cheerleader themselves. But anyway, let's get into it. So we all know that the cheerleader has written or co-written a previous book that had lots of claims. Now, it's important to note that at the time of that book, not Spare Me, that was Harry's memoir, Finding Boredom. At the time of that book, Harry and Meghan themselves and the cheerleader were kind of distancing themselves from each other, trying to make it seem like there wasn't any cooperation, when it turned out that actually there was, via friends. It turned out from the court. Do you remember Meghan's court case? The revelations came out. It had to be laid bare that she actually gave permission for her friends that spoke to the cheerleader. So she gave her permission. So there were little paw prints all over it. Now, we have the same scenario coming out again now, where Harry and Meghan are distancing themselves from the cheerleader. The cheerleader is saying, not their friend, not Meg's best friend. Megsy's best friend. Oh my goodness. So make up your own minds on that one. But I know which from previous, there is previous. Whenever there's previous history and previous doings, then you can almost, to coin an American phrase, you can almost bet your bottom dollar that it's happening again. Sometimes leopards do not change their spots. But let's get into the People article, and I'll stop and comment as we go. So, I can't believe it's nearly been a year after Spare's publication. The cheerleader claims that absolutely nothing has changed. Well, we can see that anyway. I mean, this is stuff, I could have written it. I mean, anybody could have written it. We can all quite clearly see that there is still not a thawing of relations between William, the Prince of Wales, and Charles, King Charles III, and Harry. They haven't hardly spoken in the past 6 months, 12 months. They haven't really had any visits and contact. The bare absolute minimum. As we've seen sort of this week, the first time in 6 months, apparently. Apparently there was a phone call. Right. In fact, the hurt and anger between the two brothers has now hardened into something colder and more immovable. So this is what the cheerleader is saying. Colder and immovable. Indifference. I mean, I don't know that he actually knows that, but I can kind of almost see that that bit is true. I think there is a little bit of indifference that's based in stubbornness, I have to say. I think William and Harry both have a certain degree of stubbornness. I actually think King Charles III has less stubbornness in him than what William and Harry do. I mean, that is one trait from Diana, a less desirable trait from Diana that I think both boys most definitely have inherited. She was known to cut people off. If she felt, whether she was right or wrong, if she felt that she had been wronged by someone, she would cut them off for months, for years. I mean, even Sarah Ferguson was kind of sort of fell foul of that towards the end of Diana's life. I don't think they were on very good terms at all. So I think there is indifference, but I also think that is rooted in the stubbornness of both brothers. I saw Harry's release of Spare as his last attempt at telling his family how he's felt for years. I think we all know how Harry has felt for years. But the thing is, if you've already said what you need to say, and it's fallen on deaf ears, whether you're right or wrong in your own, in your own opinions on what is right, if you've said it to people and they do not want to hear it, or maybe they have listened but they don't agree with it, and maybe you are interpreting them not agreeing with it as not listening. I think with Harry, once he left the British royal family, he started on this journey of retribution, of score settling, retribution. And it's a destructive path, a self-destructive path that I think he thinks is kind of rooted in the therapy. He thinks that he almost needs to go through this. I don't know why it has to be gone through publicly, but I think he feels from all the different therapies that he's had, and we've had reports that William thinks that all these different therapies have damaged Harry almost beyond repair, and certainly clouded his judgment. So we have Harry on the one hand, who is trying to score settle, retribution, backed by Meghan and, of course, his therapist. And then we have sort of William and the rest of the royal family who are just kind of looking on like, why aren't you just getting on? It's a choice. As always, it's down to choices. Harry had a choice when he left the royal family. By the way, I am, just to lay it out there, I am a supporter of choice when it comes to what you want to do. So if Harry, for whatever reasons, and we're not debating those reasons in this video, but for whatever reasons, he felt like he needed to leave. So to me, he should have that choice to leave if he wants to do so, taking, of course, his family with him. But then it's also an additional choice of how you move forward. And I believe, it's my own opinion, that if he had left and just maintained a dignified silence, regardless of how wronged he felt that he was, I believe that he would be in a much better position in the public favour, stateside and in the UK, and I think it would have made him less of a contentious figure, and I think he would have had better prospects of endorsements, work. He could have even started to set up, he could still set up businesses. But I do think that what's happened, the route and the path that he has chosen to take, not forced, he was choice, I do think it has marred where they are today. They could have been a real big success story, and they have not. It's actually dimmed the shine, not made it brighter. So let's continue. He says, because clearly there's never been an open enough forum to have these conversations or share these feelings. Well, let's not forget that Harry and William, with Catherine, founded the Royal Foundation, which sort of has its roots, if you like, in mental health. And for those people wondering about, what kind of reach the royal family has, the conversation of mental health, I know it was always bigger in the States to have therapists, and it was a lot more common to have to go to therapy when you've got mental health issues. In the UK, we did not talk about it at all. So prior to the Royal Foundation and Heads Up as an organisation, they really changed. They really had, all three of them had a big impact on the way that mental health is perceived, spoken about, addressed in the workplace, socially, in the UK. They had a massive impact and were complete game changers into where we are now, sort of being very open and talking about mental health issues, mental health being addressed in the workplace, and so on. So I don't necessarily think that, talking about feelings within the the younger royals. I mean, I can't particularly see Princess Anne turning around, being very talkative about her feelings. Neither can I. Well, I mean, Charles is quite sensitive, so, you know, the king, I think he possibly could. But the younger generation, I think, most definitely were. And it was around that time that both William and Harry both sought therapy. So to kind of put out that you weren't listened to, that there was no, there was no way to sort of let out your feelings, I think that is a scurrilous claim. But anyway, he says, perhaps more than any other point in history, the family is ignoring its internal fractures at its own peril. Because part of the buy-in from the British public is that the royal family is the nation's family. Well, it's always been that way. That hasn't changed. And yet, the cheerleader says, heir to the throne, William has prioritised his loyalty to the monarchy, even quietly cooperating with the UK press. Okay, tell us something we don't know. We already know that there has been leaks and whatever from both sides. Not from one side, both sides were doing it. So, there has been sort of whisperings from palace aides regarding certain stories. We know this. And actually, rather than it being a bad thing that the future king, the heir to the throne, has sort of, put duty before self. Now, we are talking in the same mould as Queen Elizabeth II, who put duty before self her entire life and was adored for it, best known for it. William is following the same. Now, imagine if it was the other way round and we had an heir to the throne that put self before duty. It wouldn't go down very well. So actually, I think William does have his priorities correct, but there is balance in his life. Diana kind of prioritised the children, but also had work as well. So she kind of had a balance. And now, of course, the Prince and Princess of Wales are very, very much balancing that act. As we've seen, they are doing less charities, but the charities they are supporting, the organisations, are more concentrated, so that it leaves more time for family time. So I think things are changing in the royal family. The cheerleader says, in Endgame, I was talking to a source quite early on in the process. Source. Rah, rah, rah. I was talking to a source quite early on in the process, and they called Harry a defector and said that was William's view, says Scobie. Now, a defector, interesting choice of words, and I can kind of see that is how the royal family may think of Harry. He did sort of abandon post. I mean, after all, this is a family business, if you like. It is the firm, as it is known as within the royal family. And Harry had very meaty roles within it. Just because he was the spare, the Duke of Sussex, does not mean that he was not given plum roles. He was given a publicly funded home. He was given the protection. And Meghan. He was given overseas tours representing the country. He was given Commonwealth roles, chunky Commonwealth roles, by Her late Majesty. He was doing his own programme of engagements. He had his own sort of household in conjunction, partly funded by the Duchy of Cornwall, partly funded in the end by Buckingham Palace from the Duchy of Lancaster. So everything that Harry wanted, Harry got. I just thought I would sort of make that point. And then he left. So I can quite easily see why defector might be the word. These are two men who once upon a time were firmly aligned in their outlook. One of them had to move on to also protect the crown. I think he's possibly talking about William. Maybe he's alluding to the fact that maybe William felt the same way as Harry. I mean, I'm not quite sure what he's getting at there. But will there be a crown left to protect decades from now? The cheerleader screams. There's a real chance here to learn and adapt to modern society and also make up for mistakes of the past. He's too late. It's already happening. They are already adapting and changing. Just the way that, for example, they are learning from the recent foreign tours. William and Catherine's Caribbean tour was an optics disaster. I don't think it was their fault. It was all organised between the palace and the government of all the different countries that they visited. But optics is a watchword. And I think ever more there is going to be more attention and focus on, okay, if we plan this, how will it look? What will the optics be? We're not quite there yet in terms of, but it will get there. And I think that's the way we're headed. Also, we've seen King Charles in Kenya sort of addressing the issues that are important to those nations that he visits. So, cheerleader, I think he's cheering a little bit too late. Even if the monarchy endures, well, it will, because there was barely a whimper when King Charles ascended to the throne, barely a whimper when Camilla was made Queen Camilla. Barely a whimper. So he's a bit short on that as well. The question remains of whether sacrificing brotherly bonds was worth it. Well, I think that's, it's a question both brothers could ask and answer, but I think it's one more pertinent for Harry, because of what he's left behind. And I can already see from Harry that kind of hankering of actually missing his life. How much more simple was his life before? I actually think it was a lot more simple. For William and the rest of the royal family, the biggest thing I think they'll be thinking is, was there a missed opportunity? And I don't think that things like bringing in people from other ethnic backgrounds is something that you should consciously do when it comes to marrying, because then we sort of enter into that realm of arranged marriages going back, kind of planned, political, if you like, royal marriages. I think the opportunity lay. Harry met Meghan. They, naturally fell in love, and therefore someone of a different ethnic background makeup that we have not seen in this country within the royal family previously. Queen Charlotte had some heritage, but I think it was something like 21 generations prior to. So Meghan, a lot more immediate with her heritage, came in, and there was an opportunity. I think the Commonwealth and this country welcomed Meghan, but there has been a missed opportunity, I do think. These are probably sad realizations and will be had far too late in the journey. Well, he's talking about hindsight, and I think everyone can look back on aspects of their life with hindsight. In the eyes of some within the institution, Harry is a threat to the crown. His freedom to exert his own thinking. I rather think someone thinks for him. His freedom to exert his own thinking outside of the confines of the institution has made him the enemy. Which is why, for the brothers, he says there's no going back. Okay, then he kind of moves on to kind of what happened, events surrounding Her late Majesty's passing. So he says, by the next morning, the Sussexes had no idea that Buckingham Palace was already planning for the Queen's final hours and the first days of the monarchy's new era, until the Duke's phone started ringing, an unknown number. He usually ignores those. Meghan told her husband to pick up the phone, and he accepted the call just before it stopped. Harry hadn't spoken to his father much that year, but this was not the time for any father and son tension. Charles told him he and Camilla were about to leave Dumfries' house for Balmoral, where Princess Anne was already by the Queen's side. He told Harry to make his way to Scotland immediately. Harry sent a text message to William asking how he and Kate planned to get to Scotland and whether they could travel together, but got no response. He was later told Harry had managed to secure a flight with his uncles, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, but that didn't happen. It was upsetting to witness, the cheerleader claims. He was told by a source close to the Sussexes Harry was completely by himself on this. Palace sources briefed certain newspapers that Charles had personally shared the news of the Queen's illness with his son. He quoted a friend of the Duke who said, "This left Harry utterly crushed. The journalists make fresh claims about the damaged relationship, blah, blah, blah." Right, let's go back and first of all, I want to go back and actually look at the timeline of events, because that is actually really important and pertinent, I think, to all the different claims being made. So at 10:30 a.m., Charles, now King, boards a helicopter from Dumfries House after receiving a warning from doctors about the Queen's health. So at about 6:02 p.m. the night before, Buckingham Palace announced that the Queen had postponed her virtual Privy Council meeting after being advised by doctors to rest. So we remember that she had engagements, she cancelled, was told to rest, and at 10:30 a.m, well, in between that time, something happened, and Charles was told, he was already staying up at Burke Hall, but he was also staying at Dumfries House, which is just a bit further down. So he was told to get there pretty quick. 12:15 p.m, the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, receives news that the Queen is gravely ill and will pass away within hours, not days. So again, we see the Queen's condition worsening. Now, on the morning of obviously when Charles made his way back to Balmoral, reporters were already there reporting on a different event, and they got wind that something was happening and to stick around. So news was spreading and circulating at that time. But I don't think that the family knew exactly which way it was going to go until much later in that day, round about when Charles was told to get to Balmoral. And I think that shows that although the Queen was frail, we saw her the previous couple of days receiving an incoming Prime Minister, saying goodbye to an outgoing Prime Minister. She looked frail, but she didn't look at the point of passing. So I will say that. So I don't think they were expecting it. I think something happened, something must have come on very sudden, whether or not it was to do with any pre-existing health condition, or whether it was a stroke on that morning. It could have been something to do with heart as well, that put her in that immediate situation of being gravely ill. And I don't think the family expected it to happen, because the bulk of them were not there. If a few days prior there were any signs or inklings that it was going that way, I think the other royals would have already made their journeys up. That was not the case. So it wasn't just Harry that wasn't notified to come until that point. It was all of the other Queen's children that were not already in the area. And William and Harry were the only grandchildren that were invited at that particular moment to get up there quick. Don't forget, there is also Zara and Peter, Princess Anne's children. There are also James Viscount Severn and Lady Louise, who could have made that journey. And of course, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, who also were not told to get to Balmoral. In fact, one of the royal princesses, actually in Endgame, the cheerleader claims that one of them phoned Harry and said, "What's going on?" So it wasn't just Harry's trying to make out, or rather the cheerleader is trying to make out, and again we forget what level of involvement Harry and Meghan have had in this book, because we don't know, but I'm assuming that it's there. So, or how else would they have got the details? Because Beatrice and Eugenie don't talk to the press about these sorts of things. So, in the book, a claim was made that one of the princesses wanted more information, so they were not told as well. So it wasn't just Harry who's making out that he's the one being poorly treated. I think it's one of those occasions where things move quickly with regards to health. I've been there in that situation where you think things are going to happen and things worsen and deteriorate quickly. And one person, there isn't the scope to sort of ring round everybody and get everyone together that quickly. Normally, there's sort of one person that kind of like chain feeds out all the information. And the information would have been changing constantly all the time. So, and also, I think, the fact that King Charles doesn't have a mobile phone, that Harry was said to be very unreachable at that point, doesn't really help with the communication. Plus, let's not forget, boarding the same plane, would William and Catherine didn't go, of course, we think to stay behind so that Meghan didn't have to go, or rather, Meghan wasn't wanted. I mean, the king there are claims that the king phoned Harry and said, don't bring Meghan. So poor Catherine may have had to stay behind under the guise of looking after the children, even though there are nannies, just to sort of keep Meghan out because of all of what they've done. And of course, there's reports that the king and William will not forgive or forget what Harry put the Queen through before her passing. Spare wasn't out at that time, but it was going to be if the Queen had lived. So she would have witnessed all of that, the Oprah interview, the stepping back, all the stuff that's been going out, the retribution, all of that would have, not gone down very well with Harry's family. So it's no surprise to me that William and the rest of them probably didn't want to share a plane with Harry, and most certainly didn't want to share it with Meghan. So he was told to make his own way. That's Harry, again, down to choices. That is Harry's doing. Harry is the one that chose to do all the things that he did when he stepped back, that put him in the position that if something happened like this, nobody wanted to travel with him. He did it himself. He's trying to blame other people, but he did it himself. Let's put it that way. So the timeline continues. 12:35, Buckingham Palace announces the Queen is under medical supervision. That was the time when everyone's ears really pricked up and were like, okay, this is serious now. We think something is going to happen. And by that point, everyone knew that the Queen was on her way. So if Harry hadn't been told by that point, I think he could safely assume. 12:39, BBC One interrupts its regular programming and Hugh Edwards presents live coverage of news of the Queen's health, and he's already dressed in black. 12:47, the royal households announce Charles and William are travelling to Balmoral. 1:38, royal sources confirm Princess Anne is at Balmoral. 1:55, a spokesperson for Harry and Meghan announced the couple are travelling to Scotland. And then, of course, they backpedalled on that. 2:39, Prince William flies from Northolt to Aberdeen Airport with Prince Andrew and the Earl and Countess of Wessex. 3:10, we know now that the Queen passed away of old age. 3:50, the flight carrying William, Andrew, Edward and Sophie lands in Aberdeen. So the Queen had already passed by 40 minutes. Now, like I say, this tells me a tale just by deduction. I mean, you don't need royal sources to deduce that if they had expected that the Queen's health was that bad that she was going to pass away, the royals would have already made that journey. So it tells me a tale that the Queen's health really did deteriorate rapidly. And perhaps the doctors were not actually predicting her passing at that point. 4:14, news alert says Harry and Meghan are travelling to Balmoral separately from the other royals. 4:30, Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, is notified that the Queen has passed away. 4:39, sources confirm that Meghan now is not travelling to Balmoral with Harry, and of course the reason cited was because Catherine was not going, or rather alluded to anyway. 5 p.m, William, Andrew, Edward and Sophie arrive at Balmoral, and they would have already been informed at that point that the Queen had passed away. 5:35, Harry's private flight takes off. 6:30, Buckingham Palace announced to the public that the Queen has passed away. So Harry was sort of... They couldn't leave it any longer, basically. I think Harry is a little bit miffed that he sort of didn't get there in time, before that announcement, if you like. But they couldn't really leave it any longer. 6:46, Harry lands at Aberdeen, 15 minutes after the palace statement. Like I said, I think that's the bit that kind of rankles with Harry the most. But I think it looks to me like everyone made the effort to notify him and keep him informed while he was in the air. Obviously, you can't receive messages. And this is basically Harry's doing. Harry is the one that basically excluded himself from the plane by having such bad relations with his family. These sorts of occasions can either, when it comes to family rifts, it can either bring people together or it can push people apart even further. There isn't really any middle ground when it comes to family rifts. In this case, it didn't bring them together. It sort of pushed them further apart. And there we go. That was kind of the whole timeline. So when it comes to Endgame, I do think there's going to be a lot of kind of rehashing of things that we already know. Things that anybody with half a brain cell can deduce from events that have unfolded and things that have come to light since. Also, we need to remember that this is one perspective, almost one side of the story, with, I think, the aim of trying to take down the monarchy. The cheerleader, rah, 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 pom-poms in the air, waving, doing all the dancing, only has one end game himself, and that is to sort of take down the monarchy, if you like, and bring them into disrepute while supporting Harry and Meghan in Montecito. So there is definitely a narrative, there is a motive, as I've just kind of demonstrated. If there was any truth to the monarchy being in jeopardy, blah, 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 it would have happened at the time of the Queen's passing. There would have been, if there was a public dislike, a public feeling that the monarchy was no more and the monarchy should not exist, that would have, the anti-monarchy movement would have happened at the time of the Queen's passing. In reality, there was barely a whimper. It was a very smooth transition to King Charles. And that is still ongoing, and there has not been any public uprising. So this is scurrilous. It is trying to push a narrative that is not there. And I can tell that just from these few leaks or excerpts, publicity excerpts that have been put out there. The cheerleader is just, he's just out to feather his own nest, if you like. Right, so I should point out from the pom-pom flailing megamouth, he tweeted, "And let's get this nonsense out of the way. Endgame is about the current state of the British royal family. It's not Harry and Meghan's book. I'm not Meg's pal. The Sussexes have nothing to do with it. Their story is a small part of a much bigger one you can read in 12 days. So he's very much trying to distance himself, as I said before. But dost the lady protest too much? Anyway, please let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I do think it has little paw prints all over it, and if you follow them, they lead to Montecito. Right, thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a big old thumbs up. Don't forget to share on social media, and of course, do hit the bell so that you know whenever I upload a new video. So, from me, to you all, and goodbye.